Okay, hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing my February wrap-up. This one's a little bit early, but that will be fun. It'll just be released a little bit early, and we are just going to go through all of the books I read in February. I read 22 books in February. That's one less than I read last month. So sad. How could I? How dare I? I've completely betrayed myself. And again, I'm happy with that. I felt like I read a lot less this month, but I think that's just because there were a lot less books that I specifically wanted to read this month. So I wasn't like, I didn't have a list of like all these books that I wanted to make sure I read before the month was over. So in the middle of the month, I only had like 14 books read, and then I just found stuff. And all my holds at the library came in at once. I was like, whew, thank God. I am gonna read a lot this month. So I'm glad that my holds did come in. But because we have 21 books to talk about, 22 books to talk about, 22 books in the month of February. We're gonna go through these really quickly because otherwise this video will be like 40 minutes long. Number one is the book I finished on February 1st, which is The Queen of Nothing. This is the last book in the Folk of the Air series by Holly Black. I swear to God, I thought I finished this series in January. I think I might have finished The Queen of Nothing literally at like 11:54 p.m. on the last day of January, so I just marked it as being read in February because the next morning, you know, when I remembered to log it. So I don't really care, but I did talk about my feelings about this series in my previous wrap-up, my January wrap-up, and I still feel the same way about it. It's just I think it's a little bit too young for me, and I think even if I had read it when it came out, I would have been still a little bit too old for it. It wouldn't have been my thing. I thought the best book was the second book in the series because that was basically where all of the political scheming was concentrated. But then I thought the last book was really weak and just felt like a bunch of random plot occurrences that were held together by like the thinnest string of plot, and didn't love the direction it took in that book. So not something I'm a super huge fan of, but like I see why it's so popular. Like it's just a fun YA fantasy series. It very much feels like book Game of Thrones, as in like the TV show, like YA book Game of Thrones. So I can definitely see why people like it and why it's popular. I read Dragon Age to Winter Nights by Patrick Weeks and a bunch of other authors. This is a short story collection based in the Dragon Age extended universe. Dragon Age is a video game series that I love and I've been playing for a really long time, and this collection of short stories was published in 2020 and is supposed to lead up into the new game. There was like a 10-year gap in between when the third game was released and when the fourth game was released, and so this is kind of meant to fill in gaps and explain what was happening in the events that led up to the fourth game in the series, and I don't know if it does that very well. This is a short story collection, so like with all short story collections, there are duds and there are bangers. I think this is like the common consensus, and I do agree after reading that Courtney Woods' 2 Crow stories are the best stories in here. They're called The Wig Maker and 8 Little Talons. I think Courtney Woods is the best writer in this collection of short stories because she's able to have a plot that is interesting and twisty while also developing interesting characters and having some sort of underlying theme to the story. So I thought hers were the best. Her stories were just fun times. A lot of the other stories were either like pointless monster of the week type stories, which just aren't my thing, or they were overly complicated and too convoluted for their own good. The author wasn't able to pull off everything they wanted to do in the limited page space that they had. So I do have a longer review written for this one on my Storygraph. But yeah, it's a Dragon Age short story collection. If you like Dragon Age, you're gonna like this, but otherwise, I don't know why you would read this. So I have decided that I'm going to go and read all of the Dragon Age novels, so I'll talk about that a little later. And then I read The Steerswoman's Road by Rosemary Kirstein, which is this is actually 2 books in one. It is the first 2 books of the Steerswoman's Road series, of the Steerswoman series. This was the only way my library had this book. It only had them both. It only had books 1 and 2 together. This was sold to me, I think I found it on like a Reddit post or something, and it was sold to me as like Fantasy Librarians, which is basically what it is, and it was very fun. The first book was good and like well done, but I wasn't like obsessed with it. Like I was just reading it here and there, like whenever I had time, like, oh, I'll pick that book up later, but I didn't feel a really strong drive to finish it like as quick as possible. You know, sometimes when you read a book and you're just like, oh my gosh, I'm so obsessed with this, I have to read it all in one sitting, but the feeling just wasn't there with The Steerswoman. But then the second book, The Outskirt or Secret, was so good and so enthralling, and I just like devoured that one. I really loved the outskirters culture and like the kind of hints of world building we get in this book and how you realize it's not actually a fantasy story, it's like a post-apocalyptic sci-fi fantasy story, which I find fun. I know some people don't like that concept, but I have always been really interested in, like, Gene Wolfe coined this. I don't know if he coined this term or if he just used it to describe Book of the New Sun, but he calls it post-historic fantasy, and I find that to be a really good descriptor of that vibe, which I like. So it did remind me a lot of Book of the New Sun, or the little bit of Book of the New Sun that I've read, and I really like The Outskirters Secret, and I really do want to continue with this series. It's just like impossible to find the other 2 books, so I'm gonna have to dig for it. And then I read Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. This one really, it's so short but so impactful. I feel the same way about this one that I felt about Claire Keegan's work, which is that it's so impressive how much Baldwin is able to do with so little, with such a short story, and it's just packed so full of good stuff, like belonging, being an outsider, compulsory heterosexuality, like being an expat, being an American in a foreign city. And it was just so interesting, and knowing Baldwin's life and how like it kind of mirrors his experience, even though the book is itself told from the perspective of, I'm pretty sure, a white narrator, it so closely mirrors Baldwin's experiences as a Black man in Paris. And yeah, it's just really interesting. I really love James Baldwin as a person. I haven't read a lot of his novels, but I've read a lot of his like essay collections. So I was so glad I finally got the chance to read this. It reminded me a lot of Queer by Luca Guadagnino, the movie, or I guess it is more accurate to say Queer is very reminiscent of this book, and kind of the theme that like once you know who you are and once you know sense of self-discovery, there are some things that you discover about yourself that you can't just ignore, and once you do open that door, you can't really close it. It's just a matter of deciding whether or not you're going to go through the door or whether you're going to stay on the side you are, and the ways in which our narrators kind of self-deny going through that door and really exploring that facet of their lives and just making themselves and everyone around them miserable instead. But yeah, anyways, 5 out of 5, no notes for this one. I really want to buy a physical copy of this book because I like to have all my favorites on me. Then I read Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. This is not The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. They have very similar titles and they were written around the same period, but they're very different books. My friend loves this book and has been trying to get me to read it for ages, and I finally decided I would finally do it and got it from the library, and I really enjoyed this one. It is a tough read, but a really worthwhile one. I really liked all the symbolism in this book and the journey the narrator goes on, and yeah, this is just a really good solid classic and I do highly recommend it. And then I read Golden Fool by Robin Hobb. I'm rereading the Realm of the Elderling series. Holy God, I love this series. Tawny Man is such a slam dunk for me, minus 200 pages of that last book, but we'll get there, don't worry. But Golden Fool is so funny because it is a book in which literally nothing happens, and yet it is so perfect. I love it so much. Literally all the reviews for this book on Starcraft are nothing happened, 5 stars. It really does have that second book disease where it feels like it's a lot of plot setup for the big climax, but it's done in such a way here where it really feels like even though nothing is physically happening, so much is happening emotionally and within Fitz and within all his friends, and you really see in this book how Fitz has been cutting himself off from any kind of community and contact with other people, and how severely that has wounded him and caused him to be such a deeply unsatisfied and unhappy person. And so I don't know, I feel like there is a lot of really necessary work done in here, even though I do like to clown on it for having nothing happen. And then I forgot how early the quarrel happens in this. I was under the impression that it was at the very end of the book, but no, it happens like 2/3 of the way through. So a whole third or fourth of this book is them fighting and not talking to each other, and it's great. The quarrel is such an insane scene. It's 15 9/11s. I couldn't believe she had these characters say this stuff to each other. We're really getting it all out there. This is the book in which it becomes completely impossible to deny the fact that at least the Fool has romantic feelings for Fitz, even though I think, you can argue up until maybe the very end that it's not reciprocated, but I don't know. It's just, if you were reading these books with a blindfold on before, you can't do that anymore, and I really love that. And the kind of the fallout of that argument and the way Fitz is immediately just why the fuck did I say any of that, but can't apologize, or even when he does, the Fool is kind of can't accept it. It's so good. It's so good. The ending of this book is crazy and I love it. And then I read Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency by Douglas Adams. I've had this book for so long because I love the TV show adaptation to call it an adaptation is really stretching it. There's a TV show kind of based off this book. It's basically just taking the concept of a holistic detective who goes by the name of Dirk Gently and having him solve crimes. I loved that show. It's got Elijah Wood in it. It's got a hot goth girl. Like, loved that show. It got canceled prematurely for probably good reasons. I mean, not for good reasons, but we now know that the kind of creator of that show is a massive creep, so I'm glad it didn't continue any longer. But I loved the TV show, and then at the time I watched it, I think in like 2020, I bought the book so that I could read it and compare it because I had heard that it was very different from the show, and then I just never read it. I'm not a huge Douglas Adams fan. I've never read Hitchhiker's Guide, and I don't think I will, honestly. Like, just from this, it's not that I wasn't impressed, but it's just such a style of book that I'm just not interested in. It's a very British humor, very quirky, very like random, very yeah, just that kind of style that I don't really enjoy. It's like very Pratchett-esque, and I haven't read a bunch of Terry Pratchett either, and again, it's because I just know that I'm not going to enjoy the style, the writing style, the tone, the plotting. Like, it's just not for me. It's one of those things where it's like, I can perfectly understand why other people like this style, but it's just not for me. And then I read The Stolen Throne by David Gator. This is the first Dragon Age tie novel that they wrote. It was written back in 2009. This is like basically a prequel to Dragon Age Origins and follows the like parents of some of the characters you meet in that game. And was this a good book? No. Did I like it anyways? Yes. And I didn't think I would because I hate heterosexual romance. I'm very picky when it comes to straight romance, and I also hate love triangles. But the double love triangle in this book was like maximum mess, maximum drama, and I kind of was into it. Like, not because I particularly cared about either of the like couples that we are trying to be rooting for, but because the pure drama was so fun to read about. Like, it was messy and I loved it. And then the fact that both of the love triangles end badly, like they both end with the characters not getting with the person they want to be with, loved that. I loved that all the straight people ended this book miserable. And yeah, so not a good book, but a fun one, and it did make me want to commit to reading at least the rest of the Dragon Age novelizations. So congratulations, David Gator, you won. You won. And then I read Thinking Inside the Box by Adrienne Raphael. Yes, this is a book about crossword puzzles. I love crossword puzzles. I do them every day. I was like packing this book up to give to another patron. It was on hold, and I sent it away, and I saw the cover and I was like, I have to read this. I don't care how long it takes to come back to this library, I will read this book. So I put it on hold after them, and it took literally like a full fucking month for this book to get to me. They stole it from me for so long, but I finally was able to read it. I really enjoyed it. It's a very almost personal look at the author's relationship with crossword puzzles and the concept of like games and puzzles in general. And so those aspects were interesting, but you know, I don't have a personal relationship with this author. I think she's written for like columns and stuff before, but I didn't know her, so it was interesting, but not really maybe the most connected I'd ever felt to an author. But also I really enjoyed hearing about like the history behind crossword puzzles and like how they came to be. And she close reads a scene from Sex and the City because there's a crossword in it, and that's the kind of shit that I love. Okay, that's the kind of unapologetically academic nerdy shit that I love. So 5 stars for Thinking Inside the Box. Then I read The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka, which of course is a classic about a man who wakes up one day to find out he's been turned into a bug, and his most pressing concerns are, how am I gonna make it to work in time? This is a book that is, I can't believe I was an English major and I never read this book. Like, I just never had to read it for class, and I've always wanted to read it. And I got this copy at a library book sale, and I'm so glad I finally read it. I really enjoyed it. It's so short and so easy to read, but like so packed with material and symbolism and themes from just like the very little you get. And I think you can read this book in I think you can read this story in so many different ways, as a metaphor again for life under capitalism, as a metaphor for life under the patriarchy in which your father is supposed to be the head of household, but you know, the McGregor has to step into that role and become the breadwinner, and like the clashing that causes between him and the rest of his family. But also again, it could be seen as a metaphor for Kafka's Jewishness and being seen as dirty and a vermin. But Kafka himself had such a complicated relationship with his own Jewishness. It's just a lot of interesting stuff packed in here. I don't know if I'm gonna keep this version because I did really enjoy the explanatory notes in this. They really did help provide some context and provide like translation places in which the translator had to like make some choices, so that was interesting to hear about that. But the documents in this, which are like a selection of critical essays about the story. None of them really appealed to me or analyzed the story in a framework that I found interesting. So I might, and this copy is a little banged up anyway, so I might get a different copy of this, but I did really enjoy it. Then I read 3 O'Clock in the Morning by Gianrico Carofiglio, and this is another book that I got from the library book sale. It's getting so dark in here, sorry. This is another book I got from the library book sale. I did not enjoy this one as much as I enjoyed the Metamorphosis. I totally messed up in my video of like hauling these books about what this book is about. First of all, it is translated from Italian, and second of all, it is not about a father with like dementia. It is about a son with epilepsy, and they, you know, go to Barcelona or whatever, and he has to stay awake for 2 nights to like stress test this new medication he's on. So that's the plot of this book, and I was actually really enjoying it up until the very end, in which the kind of like magical, transformative, awe-inspiring thing that happens to this character to finally like get him to turn into an adult is losing his virginity at age 17 to a woman who is 37 years old, and his dad is in the next room. I just didn't enjoy that in the way that was portrayed. Like it's very clearly, you know, an inappropriate relationship between a minor and an adult. Like he's still in high school, she's again like 20 years his senior, he has been, you know, drinking, and he's on medication that is like altering his mental state. So I don't know, I just hated that, and I hated that it made the relationship with the father take such a back seat, because that's what this whole novel is about. It's like this wish fulfillment-y thing about like the son bonding with his father and like really talking to him as an adult for the first time, and them kind of talking to each other about their lives, and the son asking questions about why the father and the mother like got divorced, and like learning about how they fell in love in the first place. And we never actually learn why the father and the mother separated, and I would have been okay with that. I would have been okay with it like having these unanswered questions and having this kind of tragic ending where they never are really able to connect more than how they connect in this book, if it hadn't been the fact that what we got instead was so lackluster and so trite and annoying. And anyways, yeah, the ending just really soured me on this, but it is a beautiful book and I like holding it, so I might keep it. And then I read The Calling by David Gator. This is the sequel to The Stolen Throne. It is unique among Dragon Age novels in the sense that it is a direct sequel to The Fallen Throne, The Stolen Throne, whatever the hell that book is called. It is a sequel to that book about a young hot Duncan from the first game, who when we meet him in the first game is like an older middle-aged man who is tired of it all. In this book he's like a chaos bisexual, he's not bisexual, I made that up, but he's like a chaotic young person in this book, and so that was pretty fun. This one was like a 2 steps forward, 1 step back, a 1 step forward, 2 steps back sort of situation for me. I thought it was objectively more interesting. The architect is so interesting, and then we get gay people in this book, canon gay people, Nicholas and Julian, although there are just way too many action scenes in this novel. I was so bored by all of the action scenes, especially because it's like, listen, I can just go play the video game if I want to fight, if I want combat. I don't need this. I don't like action scenes. So that was very boring to me, and I also was pissed off by the fact that the dog and the gay guy both get identical injuries, and the dog survives and the gay guy doesn't. Like, okay, that pissed me off. But then the scene where they're all stuck in the Fade Nightmare and Nicholas decides to stay asleep so that he can hang out with Julian's like spirit or whatever, I did really enjoy that. So, and then I read The Last Tale of the Flower Bride by Roshani Chokshi. Very complicated feelings about this one. I wrote this extremely long review about this one. I did not like the writing style. I know it's kind of trying to mimic a like gothic style, but I just didn't find it to be done well. It was just a lot of overly purple prose that felt like it was shoehorned in, like with no actual meaning. Like the reason the prose in gothic novels is so interesting is because it is so layered and so purposefully chosen, whereas it just felt like in this one, the way the characters described things and the things that they were saying to each other was just like meant to sound so profound, but just like really meant nothing when you actually read and understood what they were saying. But the kind of saving grace of this book was the fact that was the relationship between Azure and Indigo that we explore in flashbacks. The style there is a lot more like acceptable to me because it's from the perspective of like a young girl who is very interested in like the fairy world or wherever, and then the toxic codependent kind of gay relationship between Azure and Indigo really interested me, and I was so like sad to see what was going on with them, and it did not disappoint. But the bridegroom in comparison is just so flat and so boring, and like every time I would flip the page from an amazing Azure chapter and see the bridegroom talking about fairy tale narrative structure for 3 pages in a row, I would literally think about putting the book down and never finishing it. But I'm glad I did. I saw the plot twist coming from like literally page 15, but that doesn't mean it's a bad plot twist, although I do think it makes the theme kind of undercooked, because the theme of this book is that you should love somebody not for who you think they are or for who you want them to be, but for who they actually are. But then because we can't really explore in reality the relationship between the narrator and Indigo, because it's like tied into this twist thing, we don't get the opportunity to really explore that theme and dive into it. And so I don't know, very complicated feelings about this one, but I was intrigued enough to read more work from Roshani Chokshi. So then I read The Heart is a Lonely Hunter by Carson McCullers. I loved this book. This was like, I read this book and it just felt like my heart was being squeezed tighter and tighter and tighter until I was like sobbing at the end of the book. This is a book so deeply about loneliness and all the things that cause loneliness, and I was so impressed by the way this is done, because I feel like a lot of the times when authors explore loneliness, it is just kind of this general outsiderness that is never really pinpointed, and it's just kind of this feeling that characters have that, you know, is mystical and comes from nowhere, when in reality loneliness is caused by so many material things. And I really like that Carson McCullers explored the material systems that cause us to be alienated from each other, like capitalism and poverty and racism and everything like that. I found it to be so interesting and so great. This reminded me a lot of Disco Elysium, if you've ever played that game and enjoyed it. I felt like they were very similar politically and very similar tonally, and I would love to read more from this author, and I would love to get a nicer copy of this. So loved this one. Then I read Open Throat by Henry Hogue. This was recommended to me by a friend at a party. Yeah, I go to nerdy ass parties where people recommend books to each other, but I really enjoyed this. I opened it up and saw it was told in like blank verse poetry, and I was like, oh no, I'm not gonna enjoy this. But I actually found it to be really successful at conveying the tone it's trying to convey, like the kind of fragmented nature of a mountain lion's thoughts, which, I don't know, it portrayed it really well. I was into it by the end, and this is such a great story of like this narrator being so enthralled with humanity but also so disgusted at them at the same time, and I did really enjoy this. So okay, so you may have noticed it's much darker now, and that is because it got too dark to film, and so I gave up and went and played Marvel Rivals with my friends. But I really need to finish filming this video tonight because I just don't think I'm going to be able to do it at all this weekend. And so you're just gonna get this. I'm sorry, I know it looks a lot worse than the natural lighting, but at least it is well lit now because I did buy a lamp, so we have that. And I haven't put my contacts back in to film this, so I'm committed. We're filming the rest of this video tonight. The next book I read was Fool's Fate by Robin Hobb. This is the third and last book in the Tawny Man trilogy, which is a sub-series in Robin Hobb's Realm of the Elderling series. Like I've said, I'm rereading this series. This book is so crazy. It's like 500 perfect pages in here. I really, really love this one. The Out Island culture is so interesting. The matriarchy they have and the way that the women are like in charge and stay at home because they own the land, and the men are the ones who are like sent out, and it's all about the women's honor and stuff like that. I found that whole culture to be so interesting. And then the kind of quest they're going on and how all the pieces start to come together, and like you know that there's something going on between Eliania and the Pale Woman, but you just can't put the pieces together. You don't know why they're doing the things that they're doing until the very end. And then the ending is so heartbreaking. The kind of tragic thing that happens like 70% of the way through this book and all of the fallout from that, and then how it like brings it back at the end, and it's so just so joyful. And then there's 100 pages in here that I kind of hate more than anything else in the world. I've written several really long reviews about the ending and epilogue of this book, why I don't really love them. I mean, I'm not just wearing my Fujo goggles here, my gay goggles. Like, I just really question some of the language around Molly and Burek and Fitz, like how it's constantly said that Burek took Molly, like she's an object, and Fitz is taking her back like he's her rightful owner. It's just weird. And like even Molly says like nobody took me, I'm my own person, but then the narrative never really pushes back on that idea any more than that. And I just find the ending, weirdly, all of the fantasy stuff that happens I find realistic because this is a fantasy novel, but then like just that ending, that the relationships, the character dynamics don't feel realistic at the end of this book for me. I'm trying really hard not to spoil, but like it's impossible not to spoil the last book in a trilogy that's like 3 series into a long-running fantasy series. But yeah, this is still one of my favorite books in the series because again, it's like 500 perfect pages and then 100 pages that I don't like, but then she came back to the series and retconned so much of the stuff that I don't like in this at the end of this book, so I'll take it. We take those. Then I read A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. I knew I really wasn't gonna like this one. It's just not my thing. I'm not really into like solar punk, hope punk, cozy fantasy books. It's just not my genre, but me and my friends were looking for something to buddy read, and this was relatively short, relatively popular. It had the LGBT tag on Storygraph, so we were like, let's do this one. This is a book that we can all get access to and read fairly quickly and have a good time with. I don't think it's like the worst book I've ever read in the world. It's so short, it's very easy to read, it's well crafted for what it is, but it's just so not my thing. I need angst, I need tension, I need suffering, I need just more than what this book is giving you. It's very much a slow-paced treatise on philosophy and humanity, and it's just it all came across as honestly very surface level to me, and I didn't like that the tea monks were basically just baristas. Like, I wanted there to be more actual like philosophy and religious exploration. I found the world building and the religion to be really interesting in this book, the whole parent-child gods thing, the world building to do with the robots, the world building to do with the humans. I loved the treehouse like village that we see, but something about the main character Dex I just wasn't super into, and then again, it's just very much not the kind of story that I enjoy. I think that like Becky Chambers wants to have this utopian future where like humans and nature are in perfect harmony, we've destroyed capitalism, nobody has to work to live anymore, but she also wants to have this like Stardew Valley-esque fantasy of running away from the busy city to seek a peaceful, like more fulfilling life in the countryside. And like, I just don't know if you can have those two things at once and have it feel like realistic and satisfying in the context of this book. And it just didn't. It didn't read for me. It didn't click for me. So yeah, I see why this is so popular, and I think it's a book that a lot of people will need and respond well to, but it's just really not my thing. So. And then I read Interesting Facts About Space by Emily Austin. This was just a book I saw at the library and picked up. It was fine. It's a little bit too millennial for me, a little bit too quirky millennial for me, and honestly I didn't think the facts about space were all that interesting. I felt like they were all very basic facts about space that I learned in like 5th grade, but they were facts about space. I found the main character to actually be quite relatable and likable in her portrayal of like anxiety and paranoia. Like, her slow downward spiral into ever deepening like paranoia and anxiety, like knowing that she's acting crazy but like just feeling so unsafe, was again quite relatable to me. I thought it was done pretty well, and then I liked that she didn't just go to therapy once and be cured. Like, she actually had to go for months, several times, to actually even start beginning to figure out what the problem was, what the underlying like trauma was. So again, I felt that was really pretty realistic, but I wasn't a huge fan of the romance in this book. Like, it just didn't read as believable to me, and like that's the point of a romance in a romance novel, that it's unrealistic, but that it's like wish fulfillment. Like, you want to believe that a relationship like this could exist and that you could be in one. But yeah, I don't know, I just felt like the love interest was too perfect, too forgiving, too empathetic to Enid, too perfect for her, too quirky in ways that complimented her. It just didn't read well to me, and then some of the conflicts that they had just felt like conflicts that they shouldn't have been able to get over. Like, at the end of this book, spoilers, I don't think the love interest should have taken Enid back at the end of this book after like how she treated her. I thought it should have been like a teaching moment for Enid about how like you can't treat people like that, and like have it be something that she internalizes and like tries to do better with in the future. But again, that whole relationship felt so unrealistic to me that like, whatever, unrealistic ending, sure, it all feels unrealistic. But the thing that really bugged me was the fact that again, major spoilers, the fact that Enid forgives her friend for breaking into her apartment, triggering her paranoia so badly that she has to move out of her apartment, and then lying to her and making her feel paranoid and stupid about it when she directly asks him about it. Like, that was just like something that I personally would never be able to get over, and I don't think it would be something that a character like Enid would be able to get over. And it was crazy to me that she just completely forgives him right away. He barely apologizes. He doesn't tell her. He gets caught by her neighbor, who was like, oh, that's the guy who I told you about, who I warned you about, who's been like breaking into your apartment. And that's how it comes out. Like, he didn't even have the guts to tell her himself. I just did not believe that Enid would immediately forgive him with zero groveling, zero like time away, zero, she wasn't even mad at him. It was just like, I'm getting so emotional. No, it was just crazy the way that she immediately forgave him. I did not buy it. I did not believe it. it just felt like this ending was a little bit too clean and easy and nice, especially after the rest of the book is so like realistic about the toll that mental illness and paranoia can take on your life. And so I just wanted there to be some consequences for that, because that's how it works in real life. But it's a book, it's a wish fulfillment-y book, and I would read more from this author. I've heard their other work, We Might Be Rats, is pretty good, so I think I might try that one too. And then I read Silver Under Nightfall by Rinchi Pecco. Was this book good? No. I thought there were too many action scenes in this book. Again, maybe that's just a me thing. I don't really like action scenes. The plot and pacing of this was also just weird. It was convoluted. The plot was convoluted. The pacing was weird. It would be like a bunch of stuff happened at once, and then we would spend long chunks of time just traveling. And then my big thing was that it also felt like every character in this novel talked like they were either in or had just recently gotten out of a therapy session. Like they just talked so emotionally intelligently all the time and could always pinpoint exactly what they were feeling, why they were acting the way they were, and how to intelligently problem solve their emotions. That being said, I did love this. Yeah, I didn't come to this book expecting amazing plot and amazing like realistic characters. I came to this book because I heard it had a bisexual vampire throuple, and a bisexual vampire throuple was what I received. That's really all I wanted from this book, and that is what I got. And I was pretty satisfied by the romance in this book, by the relationship between the three main characters and their relationship. I found it to be very fun. And I have already put the sequel on hold, and I should be getting it tomorrow, so. And then I read Sword Crossed by Freya Marsk. I came to this book because I have read Marsk's other series, the Last Binding trilogy, and I thought that series was like, it was weird because I don't like historical fiction and I don't like romance, I don't like romantasy, but I weirdly did really enjoy that series, which is like historical romantasy. But I just thought the plot was so weak and so like disappointingly ended. Like it really felt like we were building up to something very like climactic and very like meaningful that could potentially require a lot of sacrifices by the characters at the end of the book, and then it just wrapped up so cleanly, so neatly, so easily that I was just really disappointed with the direction the plot took. But again, I wasn't going to those books for plot, I was going to those books for romance, and they did deliver on that front. So this book, in Sword Cross, Freya Marsh just like completely gives up on having any semblance of plot, and I honestly thought it was a lot more enjoyable for it, like not having to deal with that kind of disappointment of expecting there to be consequences and expecting there to be like an overarching more important like storyline, and then you just never get it. But in this book is solely about the main character Maddie and like him trying to save his family but also find happiness at the same time. So that felt like a way more achievable conflict, and something that a lot more of a personal conflict, that it does make sense that like it has this like happy like sunshine ending that, you know, probably is not the most realistic, but it fits for the kind of novel and the kind of plot that this book gives you, whereas the Last Binding series didn't. Like I was expecting something way different. I was marketed this book from Mina Reads as very messy, and that's what it was. I did enjoy the mess of this book. It was a lot of like characters who knew they shouldn't be, who were lying to each other and knew they shouldn't be like fucking but were anyways. And you know, there's this whole like dynamic going on where Maddie is promised to someone else, but he's only doing it because he wants to save his family, and it's like, it's a lot of stuff. I did enjoy the mess of this. I read this very quickly, and I found both the main characters to be pretty likable, pretty enjoyable. I did want more of Maddie's sister Maya and his fiance Sophia and their friendship, especially considering what happens at the end of the book. Like I just felt like we needed more of them because they end up being such big characters, but we just don't see them enough to really care about them. And then I really wish that we got more of the world building, or that it was more skillfully integrated throughout the novel, because I actually was really into this world. Like it's not really high fantasy, it's very, very low fantasy, almost more alternate Earth universe than anything else. It's like a kind of modified version of the Victorian era, a city that feels very Viennese or French, Italian French. And so I would have really liked to see more of that world building. We see very little of it, mostly in terms of like architecture and food, but what I was really interested in was the religious system. Like the god, like each noble house is sworn in service to a god, and Maddie is sworn to Huna, who is the god of weavers but also the goddess of luck, and also she might have been a human once, and it was all just very interesting, and I wanted to see way more of that. Like I still don't know why, if the gods are so important that each noble house is sworn to one, we see no kind of like religious order throughout this book. We don't see monks, we don't see priests, we just see the guilds. So I'm like, are the guilds the religious order? And like, if so, like how does that work? So I would love to actually see Freya Marks come back to this universe and write like another standalone in this universe, because I think it's an interesting world, and I think that I would like to see more of it. So, and then I read Book Lovers by Emily Henry. My friend loves Emily Henry and thinks that she could be a romance author that really works for me, because she doesn't write like just romance. She writes a lot, like her books are more to do with like the main characters, like internal struggles and stuff like that. So her books are so popular, they go like hotcakes at the library, and we had two in. We had Book Lovers and Funny Story on the shelf. I had just checked them in, and so I was like, okay, quick, which one should I read? And she was like, you neither, read Beach Read. So I put Beach Read on hold, and then she said, if you can't get Beach Read, read Book Lovers. So I grabbed Book Lovers and I put Beach Read on hold. I did enjoy this, although I thought the relationship between the sisters in this book was bizarre. It was giving Folgers commercial.
What are you doing?
You're my present this year.
Like, it's to the point where the third act breakup in this book is not between Nora and her boyfriend Charlie, it's between her and her sister Libby. Like, they're the ones who get into the big fight 2/3 of the way through this novel. And so that was weird. And it was weird that like she gets a little bit of pushback on the way she's acting from like her boyfriend being like, oh, you wouldn't want someone to tell you what to do either. But like nobody actually pointed out how weird her dynamic with her sister is and how overprotective and codependent she is with this sister who is an adult woman with her own family and her own life and her own friends, and that Nora clearly was only acting this way because they lost their mother at such a young age and she had to kind of step into that role and be parentified. And like no one ever acknowledges that. No one ever acknowledges like, girl, you need therapy bad, you need to go right now to therapy. Like the death of your mother is not just something that you get over with because you have a hot boyfriend and you finally are able to cry once. You need to go to therapy, girl. It is very unhealthy. But I did like the romance in this one. I really liked the dynamic between Charlie and Nora. Like, I had to skip some of the dialogue and the sex scenes because I do hate straight people just a little too much. But I liked seeing a romance between two very like ambitious, career-driven people who like talk about in the book that they definitively do not want kids. I feel like that's such a rarity in heterosexual romance books. Like the happy ending is always to like get married and get pregnant, and that's just something that doesn't really appeal to me. I really liked that the characters in this book didn't want that either, and they were very like definite about the fact that they wanted to be child-free. Like it didn't mean they hated kids, like Nora loved her nieces and nephews, but she didn't want them herself, and that was treated as totally fine. So I did like that. I can't wait to read Beach Read. I think my hold on that is also in, so we'll see. Then I read The Gilded Wolves by Roshani Chokshi. It's a library copy. I'm trying to cover up the barcode that doxes me. So I wanted to give Roshani Chokshi another chance after I read The Last Tale of the Flower Bride because so many elements of that like almost worked for me but just didn't. And I wanted to see if that writing style that was in The Last Tale of the Flower Bride continued on into her other work, or if that was just like a gothic-esque style that she was putting on for Last Tale of the Flower Bride. So I got The Gilded Wolves, and I don't read a lot of YA anymore. I'm an adult and I just don't really like YA. I know a lot of adults still do read YA and like really enjoy it. It's just not for me. I need grown-ups. I need grown-ups, please. But I really did want to read more from Roshani Chokshi, so I got The Gilded Wolves, and I thought this was a fine book, a slightly above average YA fantasy. It's like Babel meets Six of Crows. It's like a heist novel about a group of plucky outcast teens who all have their own like special power and special ability and like weird romance between the group. Not the most unique thing in the world, but I did enjoy, again, Six of Crows meets Babel is a weird kind of dynamic, but I did enjoy like the themes of anti-colonialism and like the fact that a big part of this book is like the way that Western cultures will like steal artifacts from the cultures that they oppress and then like treat them as like marvels. So that was really interesting, and seeing the author's note about how it was inspired by reading about like human zoos in the Philippines, and the author is like half Filipino. So that was really interesting. That was something I think, you know, a great thing to see in a YA novel. I did think some of the characters were undercooked. Like it was clear that there were favorites in this group. Severin and Layla got a lot of development, and then Enrique and Zofia get a little bit of development, and then like Tristan is just thrown to the wolves. You know basically nothing about him except he likes insects. Some characters are more well developed than others, and I wasn't a fan of any of the romances here. I know that's probably because I am too old and too heterophobic to get into what is being given to me, but there's multiple romances going on here at once. There's the kind of flirtation between Enrique and Zofia, which felt very like they get a lot of development and a lot of like screen time, page time devoted to them talking about how much they like each other, but like that's just it. It's them talking to the audience, telling us that, oh, I like her, like, oh, she's beautiful or whatever. And I just didn't feel the chemistry between them and their actual interactions. Whereas the other kind of romance that Enrique is in, Enrique and Hypnos, felt like they had a lot more chemistry on page, like between them, but they didn't get any development. And Hypnos himself feels very secondary to the story and also doesn't get a lot of development. He just comes in to like be quirky every so often. So it was hard to root for either of them. I think it's probably just gonna be a love triangle, but like, what if she's setting up a throuple here? That's my weakness. You know my one weakness, and it's a throuple, so I'm kind of hopeful. It kind of feels like the reason that these romances are so perfunctory in this book and are kind of like, okay, just get it out of the way, set it up that they're all interested in each other so that we can have a throuple in book 3. But I don't know, maybe it'll just be a bisexual love triangle and I'll enjoy that too, but I just wasn't super invested in either of them. And then Layla and Severin, so much of their relationship is based on interactions they have before the start of the book, so it's just so hard for me to be invested in them. And also just like, I don't care for their dynamic. I think that they will work for a lot of people. It's a very like it's a dynamic I've seen before, and it's a dynamic I think people will like. It's just not one that I'm super interested in. So I did think it was objectively better done than Enrique and his love interest, because Layla and Severin do get a lot of, again, both get a lot of separate page time that they get to develop their characters and develop their emotions for each other, and also get a lot of time together to develop that relationship. So whatever. I wasn't thrilled with the way they ended the story, but like the weird thing about this book was that it was great and perfectly fine up until like the last 50 pages, which is when we get this like second delayed climax. This like tragic thing happens and causes like all of this stuff to happen and all of these rapid time skips to happen in extremely quick succession. And so it was just impossible to kind of actually care about the like tragic thing that happens at the end of this book, because it feels like we've skipped by it really quickly. Like it's suddenly just like, okay, 3 weeks later, 6 months later, and you're like, okay, but I want to see the emotional fallout from that. I want to see like what happened, like why are we speeding so quickly through all this character development at the very end of the novel. Like you get the climax of the novel plot wise and you're like, okay, great, the novel's over, and then you get the second climax and it was too quick. It was way too much stuff shoved into like 50 pages. This novel either needed to be like 200 pages longer so that we could adequately explore and have all this stuff happen and explore the fallout of all of it happening, or it needed this to be like another book. Like there could be a whole other book in here, or Chakshu just needed to majorly rework the plotting, the structure of this plot. And I just don't think the editors wanted her to, or I don't think she did. And so it really did feel like I was enjoying this novel and thought it was like really pretty well done for like 80% of this novel, and then she dropped all her spaghetti at the end. But I do already have book 2 on my way to me, so I'll still be reading it. We'll reserve our judgment. So okay, I'm finally done, and this is the section where I talk about what I'm currently reading, what's on my, because I don't really have a TBR list, but I do read a lot of books at once, so I already have some stuff that I'm working on. I'm currently reading Private Rights by Julia Armfield. This is one of the books I got from the library book sale. I'm like 20% of the way into this. I'm reading The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett. I'm so close to finishing this, and I really wanted to see if I could finish it so that I could, you know, put it in this wrap up, but like I'm just not gonna be able to finish it before and still have time to film. I mean, now that it's dark and I'm filming, I probably could have done it, but whatever. I'm so close to finishing this. I'm really enjoying this. And then as always, I'm very, very slowly making my way through this bad boy, Book of the New Sun by Jean Wolfe. I feel like I'm a good third into it now. I'm on Claw of the Conciliator, probably like 100 pages away from entering Sword of the Lictor. So then my priority reads for next month are the third Dragon Age novel, Asunder, because I just need to figure out the timeline here. The Dragon Age timeline makes 0 sense. And then I want to read again all of my holds. So Beach Read, Silver Serpents, I think is what the second book in the Guild of Wolves series is called. And then what else is on hold for me? Court of Wanderers, which is the sequel to Silver Under Nightfall. And then I also want to read The Golden Raven by Nora Sakavic, which is the second book in the kind of sequel All for the Game series about Jean and Jeremy. I don't know if this one has, like, if this series has a name or if it's also All for the Game, but so this video is scuffed as hell, but that's life. Thank you so much for watching. If you've ever read any of these books, I would love to know what you also thought about them. And yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!